All right, everybody, welcome to our first look at our opponent preview series for the 2022 season. We'll be doing this every week leading up into TCU football's games. This week, we kick it off with one of the most anticipated matchups of the preseason for TCU fans, something we've all been looking forward to, not just because we get to play a Power 5 opponent, a Pac-12 opponent, but because it happens to be in one of the greatest cities in the continental United States, as TCU fans have an excuse to travel to Boulder, Colorado to watch the Horned Frogs kick off the 2022 campaign. To get us ready for this really anticipated matchup, we are joined by Brian Howell, who is the CU beat reporter for buffzone.com. Brian, thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon to talk a little bit of Buffs football with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's always good to talk some football, and it's great that the football season is finally here.
Yes.
After 8 months of off season and talking about what these teams might look like, it's nice to have a game week.
Well, it's also nice to get to talk about these teams as opposed to just talking about realignment. But of course, let's just start there, right? This right now is obviously a non-conference game, but if you are to listen to the tea leaves or read the smoke billowing out of the Pac-12 and Big 12 offices, it seems like Colorado and the Big 12 have had some discussions. What do you know from your side about where the Pac-12 is today and where you see Colorado playing in the future?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think probably every team left in the Pac-12 has probably had at least preliminary discussions with everybody, just kind of put some feelers out there. But the basic message is the Pac-12 wants to stay together. How viable that is, we'll see. I think a lot of that depends on what Oregon does and what Washington does, probably together. Could depend on what Stanford does. I think what Notre Dame does impacts a lot of what goes on here. But from the beginning, at the beginning, I thought Colorado's going to the Big 12 eventually. But I think if the Pac-12 if they can hang on to Oregon and Washington, I think CU stays where they're at. But how viable, I don't know. I could very well see Colorado winding up in the Big 12 at some point soon.
Do you think that, when Colorado made the moves to the Pac-12, obviously at the time it seemed like a no-brainer. Just where the conference was at the time, where college football landscape was at the time, it made a ton of sense. But do you think, looking back now, a few years down the line, hindsight is 2020, and maybe it wasn't the greatest move for the university and especially for the football program?
No, I think overall they've liked the move. I mean, the Pac-12 really aligns better academically with what CU is. It aligns with their alumni. They've got a ton of alumni on the West Coast, and that was kind of a big draw to it. I mean, it was years and years before that actual move, 12 years ago, that the Pac-12 asked Colorado to join, and Colorado didn't do it. So they've kind of flirted with it for a long time. I think they like the move in general, but you look at it, and the football team hasn't been very good, and so it's easy to say, yeah, it hasn't been a great move, but some of the decisions they've made with football, CU wouldn't have been very good in the Big 12 either. So, it's just kind of overall the football program just needs to get better. I don't think that matters what conference they're in, but I think there's a lot of things that they've enjoyed about the Pac-12 as opposed to the Big 12.
You talk about CU not having been a great program here over the last decade plus. A lot of the younger college football fans might not realize what a powerhouse the Buffs were back in the 90s and the early 2000s. What has kind of changed about the direction of the football program or the university as a whole that's kind of put them into being I don't want to call the program an afterthought, but they haven't really been super competitive, other than, they had that couple nice seasons here and there, but overall not the program that those of us that have been around a while are used to seeing come out of Colorado.
Yeah, and you can probably call them an afterthought. I mean, even Carl Durrell at our football media day earlier this month said, he said, hey, Colorado has not been relevant in a long time, and they really haven't been. But it's been a series of things that have just, bad coaching hires, some bad decisions, and just the administration's not maybe as fully behind football as other schools' administration is. So there's just been a lot of things. I mean, they were pretty good even early 2000s. 20 years ago, they were competing for a national title, or they at least thought they should be. I mean, they were a 2-loss team that thought they should have been in the title game and just got left out of it. So they were that close just 20 years ago. Now that seems like a long time ago. I get it. But in that, they've had some coaching hires that didn't work out. They've just, had some administration things. And when a coaching hire doesn't work out, that can set a program back several years, as you know. And so when you've got 2 or 3 of those back to back, that really hurts a program, and they're still trying to climb out of that.
Well, you brought up Karl Dorrell and you brought up coaching hires. He's in year 3, right, heading into the 2022 season. Coming in year 3 in 2022 means you started in 2019, which means that you took the full brunt of COVID and a half. And the Pac-12 was one of those conferences that kind of cracked down a lot harder than most when it came to COVID-19. And so it's hard to judge him based on what opportunity has been available to him. But what are your impressions of Dorrell? Do you think he's the right guy to lead the program kind of out of that hole? I don't think a lot of people really know much about him. He's got a ton of experience. He was a head coach at UCLA. He's been in the NFL. Do you think that the program and the administration is behind him, or is this going to be another one of those, he's got a year to turn it around or else?
Yeah, I think administration is very behind him right now. And a big reason is, just a little background. When he was hired, Mel Tucker was hired 2019, and that was his first season. And after 1 year, it was February of 2020 when Michigan State threw him a bunch of money, and Tucker left after 1 year. Right. So now Dorrell gets hired late February, which is very late in the cycle. As you know, most coaches get hired in late November, early December. So now he's behind the 8 ball there, and he's got just a couple weeks to put his staff together before spring ball, which never happened because 3 weeks after he's hired, COVID hits. And so that's his first season. He really never, they went 4-2 and played in the Alamo Bowl that year, but he even says, I don't even count that year. It didn't really count. It was a tough year. And then last year, NIL hits, the transfer portal, all that stuff. And, there's been so many changes in college football in the 27 months or whatever since he's been on the job. It's so crazy. So last year they fall to 4-8, and then this year the transfer portal, they lose a bunch of guys. I think it is hard to judge him right now, and I think administration takes that into account, and that's why they're behind him. And they also don't want to go through another coaching change so quickly again. When they wanted to move on from Mike McIntyre after 2018, he did a good job. They want to go to the next level. Mel Tucker, I think, was going to get him there, but when you leave after 1 year and you have to do that search again, that's tough. And I think CU is behind him because they want some consistency with the program. I think this year has got to be just a total disaster for Karl Dorrell to not be here again in 2023. And I don't see a total disaster with this team. I think that it's a young team that's going to struggle a little bit, but I think they are behind him because he's a good man. He's getting some things going the right way, and they want to be behind him.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of us have forgotten that Mel Tucker was only there for a year. It was so quickly. Yeah. That to have a coach that was that highly thought of leave so quickly could really set you back. But yeah, it's if Dorrell started in 2020, then you've got to give him at least a full normal season, which hopefully is what we're staring down at this year. But who knows, right? Right. So you talked a little bit about the transfer portal, and there was kind of a mass exodus coming out of Colorado. And we're seeing this at a lot of schools too. And obviously you brought up NIL. That's a huge part of it. COVID with changing people's eligibility, I think also plays a role into that. What were you hearing coming out of the program as far as why so many guys left? And is this maybe an addition by subtraction, and that you may take a hit early, but you're building up a lot of young talent and getting them experience that could pay off down the line?
Yeah, numbers wise, it looks like a mass exodus. I think there was, I don't even know what the final number is because it kept changing, but I think it was 23 guys left. But a lot of that was guys that weren't playing and weren't going to play, that kind of even the coaching staff kind of moved along and said, hey, it's best for you to go somewhere else. There was really about 6 players that they lost that kind of hurt. And one of them is actually at TCU right now, Mark Perry, the safety. But he was one of about the 6 guys that left that kind of hurt. But Mark is not in this category that I'm about to talk about next, but a lot of the message I get is that there was addition by subtraction because they got rid of some personalities that weren't necessarily great in the locker room. Mark was not one of those, but in my opinion anyway, I wasn't in the locker room, but I think that they view that as that was addition by subtraction, and that they needed to move on from some of those players. And they love the young talent there. They got a lot of good players at receiver where they got hit hard in the portal. They feel like they got some good young players in the secondary where they got hit really hard in the portal. So they feel like they've got good talent there. It's just got to prove itself.
Yeah, so there'll definitely be a learning curve, and it's probably good news for TCU that they're going to get them game one before these guys have kind of gotten to get wet behind the ears a little bit. You brought up Mark Perry, and I'll tell you everything coming out of Fort Worth is that he's definitely not one of those guys. He's been a great leader, just a high character guy, a hard worker, and we've absolutely loved what we've seen out of him. What can you tell us about him as a player? What you saw in his time. I know he dealt with some injuries and different things too, but what do you think that TCU fans can expect out of Mark now that he's in Fort Worth?
Yeah, Mark was actually one of my favorite players at CU, and even when he left, he and I would trade some messages. I got to know him fairly well. Really good young man. I think he was developing really well at CU. His first year was 2019 with Mel Tucker, and he really had kind of a niche role that season where they put him in what they call the star or nickel, but he had kind of a niche role there where he made some big plays, and so people were expecting a lot out of him. And then 2020, he played just safety, which was kind of new for him, and he struggled a little bit. And by his own admission, he didn't have a good year. Last year was his second year really playing safety, and I thought he was, arguably the most improved player on the defense. And I thought he was a leader on that team as well. Frankly, I was surprised he left CU, and I don't fully know why. I think that for him, he just kind of needed or felt like he wanted to change. I don't know why, but I think he's a good player and a good young man. I think TCU is getting a really good find there. I mean, from everything I know, not a locker room cancer whatsoever. And he was very much developing as a player. He's really fast. I mean, he was on the track team also at CU, and was part of one of the fastest 4x100 meter relay teams CU's ever had. So, good player, and I think that TCU is really going to like having him.
I didn't know he was on the track team out there too. That's awesome. Yeah, we've loved what we've seen out of him. I expect him to play a huge role in Joe Gillespie's defense this fall. So it's always funny when a guy transfers and then his first game is against his old team. So that'll be a storyline to watch for sure. All right, let's talk about this year's team. Let's talk about the guys that are here. CU actually released a depth chart, which is more than we can say for TCU at this point. Yeah. But they left off one critical position. It does not seem like they're prepared to announce a starting quarterback. We can relate down in Fort Worth because we have no idea who's taking the first snap either. What can you tell us about the candidates to start? Do you have kind of a guess on who you think comes out first? Are we going to see both quarterbacks potentially? Or is this a situation where there's a reason where they're keeping it under wraps to keep TCU kind of in the dark?
Well, Carl Durrell didn't say this was the case, but I do believe that part of the reason why they're not announcing is because TCU's not either. Carl was actually
college football.
Yeah, he was asked that directly if that played into his decision, and he said no. But we know how coaches are. I'm sure there's some gamesmanship there of, hey, you're not going to announce yours, we're not going to announce ours. And
we had Gary Patterson for 20 plus years. We know all about gamesmanship. So
yeah, just a little side story. But 2016, CU went up to Michigan. And Jim Harbaugh is notorious for not releasing a depth chart. And so CU's sports info department decided to release a dummy depth chart that had a whole bunch of character names that were at quarterback, like movie characters, South Park characters, things like that in all the positions. So they kind of they were on Sports Center, things like that for that. So there's that gamesmanship, right? But I think there's some of that for CU. I don't know, but everything I hear is that it is a really tight competition, and so I think that there's some of that they really don't know who's going to be the guy full time for this team. I think both of them are going to play on Friday night. I don't know who takes the first snap. My gut tells me it's going to be Brendan Lewis. He was the starter for 12 games last year, struggled along with the rest of the team, as a freshman quarterback. But my gut is that he takes the first snap because he's the incumbent. And I think that they'll kind of defer to him a little bit. But we're also going to see J.T. Shrout, who transferred from Tennessee about a year and a half ago and was very much in the competition last year before tearing up his knee in a scrimmage midway through August. So he never got to play last year. He's healthy again, and it's those two guys that have competed all camp. I mean, J.T. wasn't even fully cleared until the summer, so he didn't get spring ball. But I think it's definitely between those two. I think we're going to see both of them. They're very different quarterbacks as well.
Is there, what do you think that each of them presents as a challenge to a TCU defense that's learning a completely new system for the first time in 2 decades? Or is there one that you think might have an advantage against Joe Gillespie's 3-3-5?
Yeah, I don't know which one will have the advantage, but they are different. JT is more of the pocket passer. He's got a really strong arm. He makes some NFL type throws sometimes. You're like, wow, how did he get that ball in there? Brennan doesn't do that as much, but he's that dual threat, and he's always been a pass first dual threat. He played at Melissa, Texas high school, and threw for a ton of yards, but also rushed for a ton of yards. He's the one that's more likely to hurt you with his feet, and I think maybe he gives CU an advantage in that regard against this defense. I know TCU's defense is kind of designed to not give up the big passing plays, and so maybe that favors Brennan a little bit for making some things happen with his legs. But that's why I kind of think we'll see both of them, is that you can give a different look each drive or each play.
Yeah, I think we'll probably see multiple quarterbacks out of TCU too, whether it's Max Duggan or Chandler Morris that gets a start. We've been given every inclination that Sam Jackson will also play in kind of some of those special sets, because they're all dual threats, but he's the guy that can really run. So it'll be interesting to see these guys kind of see who can mess up the opponent's defense a little bit more. Before we talk about the defense more in depth, you talked about the wide receivers. There's a lot of youth in the 3 deep and the 4 deep, but there's also a lot of experience too. When you look at wide receiver and tailback, who are the guys that we should be watching, whose name do you expect to hear called over the loudspeaker quite a bit Friday night?
Yeah, one guy that we think is going to be healthy and ready to go, that TCU fans probably know pretty well, is RJ Sneed, who played at Baylor the last 5 years. So right. I haven't looked. I don't remember. I don't know how many times he's played against TCU, but it's obviously been multiple because they face each other almost every year. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what his production's been against TCU, but you've heard that name for sure. He is by far the most experienced receiver on this team. 133 career catches. The next guy on the list for CU has 28 career catches. Wow. So, there's a huge difference in experience and production. RJ, though, injured his foot during the spring game in April and was not fully cleared until this last week. So he started practicing on Monday. Carl Durrell thinks he'll be ready. I think he'll be ready, so I think you'll see his name. How much, I don't know. Daniel Arias is another guy that he's a senior. He's got all the NFL tools that you want, but he has not put it together yet. And we've kind of been waiting for that for 5 years. And boy, he's got speed. He's one of the fastest guys. He's also 6'5", 210 pounds. He's got all the tools, but he's a guy that they're going to try to use a lot. Montana Lamonius Craig is another one that these young up and coming receivers that he's got 10 career catches, but he's got potential to be their leading receiver this year. So he's one of those guys. Chase Penry is a slot receiver that showed up a little bit last year. And then you got a guy like Jordan Tyson that is a true freshman that wasn't one of their highly recruited guys, but he got here in the summer, and the name we kept hearing more than anybody throughout the summer and fall was, wow, watch out for Jordan Tyson. He's a speedy, kind of polished freshman receiver. So he's a guy, I don't know how much he plays, but if they get him out there, they're going to try to use him probably for a big play here and there. So those are some of the guys you might hear on Friday night.
TCU gave up more than 200 yards rushing per game last year, and a defensive performance that still has most of us that have followed the program for a while flabbergasted. Is there anybody lining up in the backfield that is capable of breaking off those types of games and getting that 100-yard plus affair against Frogs Friday night?
Yeah, and that's an interesting position too. I mean, that was one of their big losses in the portal. Jarek Broussard was the Pac-12 Player of the Year 2 years ago and is now at Michigan State. Alex Fontenot is probably the lead guy. He was their leading rusher in 2019, which seems like a long time ago because it kind of was. But then 2020, he has a hip injury. He doesn't play at all. Last year, he's a backup to Broussard. But he's got all the ability to lead this team again and be a 1,000-yard type of rusher. So he's probably the lead back there. And then Dion Smith is a guy that has had a really good camp. He's been a backup. He was that number 3 guy last year. Both those guys are probably leading this backfield, both guys from Texas as well. So, it'll be interesting to see. I know they're looking forward to playing Texas teams, and so, facing TCU is going to be fun for them. But those are the 2 lead guys we're going to hear a lot on Friday night.
And the last part of the offense, it's one of the big question marks for TCU as well. But the offensive line for the Buffs, the Frogs were the second worst team when it came to quarterback pressures and sacks a year ago, behind or in front of only Kansas, which basically means you're the worst. Do you think this offensive line is going to face a challenge from the TCU defense, or do you see kind of because the TCU defense has been kind of inept at creating pressure, are they going to hold up really well against the new look Frogs front?
Yeah, TCU would have loved to have played against CU's offensive line last year. This year, we'll see. Because that position group was in such disarray last year. They fired their offensive line coach after Game 7, and that group as a whole. I talked to all of them at some point during the offseason, and they all said they didn't learn anything from the previous offensive line coach. There was times they were coming off the field after a drive, and they would go up to guys that weren't even on the staff that had played offensive line that are hanging around on the sidelines and say, "What do we do? Can you help us out here?" And you have to put that in perspective when you evaluate Brendan Lewis as well, honestly, because imagine he was a redshirt freshman, but a freshman quarterback playing for the first time, and he knows his offensive line doesn't know what they're doing,
Wow.
So that makes him run for his life. So that group was just in disarray last year. They've got 3 starters back. They love their new offensive line coach, Kyle DeVan, who was an analyst in Michigan last year. Michigan won the Joe Moore Award, which goes to the best offensive line in the country. Kyle DeVan was a part of that group. So they love what they're getting from him. They've got 3 starters back. They had Tommy Brown, who was a backup at Alabama the last several years as a transfer. They've got an Iowa transfer that could be their center. So they've got some guys that they feel they're a much better group this year. Now, this is the first test in that, and so we're going to find out. So to answer your question, I don't know what that matchup is going to look like because I want to see this offensive line come together because Tommy Brown is actually in the same situation as RJ Sneed in that he wasn't cleared fully until this last Monday. So we don't know if he's going to how much he's going to play on Friday night. But he was like the biggest addition of their offseason. So we'll see with him. But that's one of the biggest question marks with CU is how good is this offensive line? I think Friday is going to be a good test of that.
It's like talking to a mirror because I think TCU fans would say some of the same things and that maybe the offensive line coaching wasn't what we had hoped it would be over the last several years. A veteran coach, been part of Gary Patterson's staff for many years, but had coached a lot of different positions and the O-line seemed to be a weakness for the Frogs, especially the last 2 seasons. Flipping that now to the other side. So TCU offensive line, also a major question mark. What do you expect out of the defensive front for Colorado? Are they going to be able to give whoever's taking snaps behind there some problems?
Yeah, I think so. That's the strength of CU, maybe the whole team, but especially on the defense is their front 7, their defensive line, their starting group especially is really good, and they feel like they've got good depth now. They just dismissed one of the depth pieces from the team this last week. He was a senior that had been around a while and been a pretty productive player for them. So that hurts their depth. But Jalen Sami, Naeem Rodman are 2 guys that are really good defensive tackles that have stuffed the run pretty well the last couple of years. Terrence Lang is one of those first off the bus type of guys at defensive end that you look at and say, wow, that's an NFL player. Hasn't had the production that matches that, but he's got all the ability to do that. Guy Thomas is another one that outside linebacker that was playing really well through 7 games last year, then injured his foot and missed the last 5. He's back. And so those 4 I expect to be the starting group, but they've got a lot of depth in the front 7, a lot of young guys, and they're going to kind of roll guys out. I mean, Carl Durrell mentioned that defensive line we're going to use like hockey and kind of, roll through lines. And so I don't know if they're that deep, but, they definitely want to keep guys fresh, and I think they've got the tools to do that. So that front 7 is a strength of the defense, and I would be surprised if, they got run over and didn't have some sort of production on Friday night.
So what kind of front is that? Because I'm looking at the depth chart and some of the names. Are they kind of running like a 3-4? Is that more of a 4-3?
Well, they've been a 3-4, and a big deal was made. They're adjusting to a 4-3 base, but they'll play a lot of different fronts. They like to be multiple, but their base is going to be a 4-3, where it's kind of the 2 defensive tackles, the defensive end, and kind of that outside linebacker. So it'll be that, and then they got 3 pretty good inside linebackers too, as well. So we'll see how much they stay in the base defense, but that's kind of the base. I think we'll see a lot of 3-man front as well.
Yeah, you see it like Sam and Mike, and those all make sense. And then there's this Mo inside linebacker, and I'm like, that's a little bit different. Like, I understand the edge. Sometimes it's going to be a guy with his hand down. Sometimes he's going to be a stand-up edge rusher. It's more of that kind of that flexible position. So that'll be an interesting look. Where that gets interesting to me is, you look at these Sonny Dykes offense, which when he was at Cal, there was some crossover there, and then obviously we've seen what he's done in his stop since, but he's going to throw out 4 wide receiver sets, going to have tight end sets. TC might actually use a tight end this year. It's new to us. We're all adjusting. But how do you think that secondary is going to hold up against guys like Quentin Johnston, who is a preseason All-American, and Jordan Hudson, who's a 4-star recruit that's been lighting up camp, with that young secondary and all the turnover there? Do you think that's a place where the Frogs might have an advantage?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the scariest parts for CU fans right now is that secondary. And like I mentioned before, I mean, the Buffs love their talent there, but their top 2 corners from last year, one of them is playing at Oregon right now, another one's playing at USC, and then you got Mark Perry playing at TCU. So that's 3/4 of their starting secondary from last year. That CU is actually going to play all 3 of them this year at some point. So you've got to replace them. I mean, you got 2 corners that they really like, Nico Reed and Kalen Moore, that were true freshmen last year, and that they played 150 snaps or so, which isn't very much. It's about 2 games worth, but they played that last year. They're the starters now, and behind them, they're the veterans on this team, because behind them you have 4 true freshmen that either arrived in January or June. So that's the cornerback group right now. And then at safety, you've got Trevor Woods, who is down from Texas as well. That he's been banged up throughout camp, but we think he might be healthy this week. He's pretty good, but he'll be next to Isaiah Lewis, who's like a 3rd-year starter. He's the one guy on the defense or in the secondary that has some experience, but the rest of that secondary has almost no experience. And while they love the talent, it's scary to go up against some All-American receivers and some guys with the speed that TCU has in game 1.
Yeah, and I think obviously that's going to come down to what the defensive line is going to be able to do with pressure. We've seen if you can keep your quarterback upright, you take defensive secondaries apart. But if whoever's back there for TCU is running for their life a bit, then it kind of evens the playing field. But a lot of freshmen and sophomores in that 2 and 3 deep in that secondary. So that's a place I expect Sonny Dykes to be looking for advantages. Whether or not TCU can get the ball to the right guys at the right time is something that we've been waiting to see for the last couple of years. I'd be remiss if I left. Go ahead.
Real quick, sorry, one other quick thing. When they go to 5 DBs, their nickelback is Tyron Taylor, who is also a true sophomore. So, there's just youth, and he's very good, but, and Trevor Woods is a true sophomore as well. So really, of what we think will be the 5 starting defensive backs, 4 of them were true freshmen just a year ago. So wow. It's an interesting group.
It'll be fun. It should make for some entertainment. This could be one of those games where it's just the big plays kind of make the difference. If you can get those chunk plays, that chunk yardage, it's going to be where the game is probably won or lost. And then quickly on the specialists, kicker, it looks young as well for you guys, as is punt, and the return game is very young. The true freshman punter and a lot of freshmen and sophomores in the return game as well. Is there anything where you feel like that they might be able to break off a big play or have an advantage? Special teams in game 1 can really be a make or break field for programs as well. Yeah,
and when you talk about all this youth, 59 of the 85 scholarship players are freshmen or sophomores. So that's why we're talking about so many of them. But their kicker, Cole Becker, is the sophomore, true freshman last year. He's got one of the best legs in the Pac-12, if not the country. Hit a 56-yarder last year, which is the longest ever by a freshman at CU. Missed his first 3 kicks and then went 14 of 17 the rest of the year. So they're in good shape if they've got to kick field goals. The punter, they had a good one last year, a guy from Australia that they decided to move on because Ashton Logan was coming in as a true freshman. They'd already gray shirted him. They didn't want to delay him anymore, but he's a true freshman. And so from what we've seen in practice, there could be a little bit of an adventure there. I think it'll be good, but at least starting off, true freshman punter is a little bit scary. In the return game, Nico Reed, the cornerback we talked about, is probably their lead kick returner. He had 1 return last year, and he took it 100 yards for a touchdown. So wow. There's some electricity there. Chase Penry, a receiver, is kind of a sure-handed punt returner, and but he's got the ability to get 15, 20 yards on a return. So the return game, I think, is in pretty good shape. And then Cole Becker, I don't have any worries about him as a field goal kicker.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Because one thing I've noticed with Sonny Dykes, and we'll see when rubber hits the road, but that he's not afraid to put his veteran guys on special teams. And a lot of those, juniors and seniors are playing, and especially early in the season, you can get burned really badly if you have, a true freshman or a sophomore in an important spot and an electric returner. So that's definitely, I think, something for fans to watch. Last two things before I let you go is, I want to get a prediction. I want to get some hot spots for Boulder. So Colorado picked to finish last in the Pac-12 this year in the preseason poll. Yeah. How do you see them ending up there? Do you think they'll be better than that? And then going from that, how do you see Friday night's game playing out in a score prediction? If you're willing to put it on paper, I don't like doing it personally, so I always hate to ask people to do it.
Right. I think CU is better than that. And I'm sure part of it is that this is the program I'm around, and it's easy to kind of drink the Kool-Aid that they feed you. Right. But I think as long as they stay healthy and as long as these young players are as good as they think they are, that they can perform, when the lights are on, I think this team can be better than that. With some breaks, maybe a bowl team, but I see this as a 4-8 type of team that maybe finishes 10th or 11th in the Pac-12. I don't see them absolutely last, but for me, I think this is one of those 4 wins. And part of it is, I think TCU is a good program, but they've been a decent program in recent years, not what we saw for years under Gary Patterson. And with a new head coach, I think there's an adjustment period. And when I look at Sonny Dykes' career, his worst year of the program is his first year. It's always, at Louisiana Tech, Cal, and SMU, he struggled in the first year a little bit. And so I think that there might be some growing pains for TCU. I think Folsom is rocking on a Friday night to start things off on ESPN. I think this is the time to get TCU. I wouldn't want to play the Horned Frogs in November, but I think right out of the gates might be the time for CU to get them. Score prediction, I haven't thought about that, but I'll give you one. I'll go out on a limb and I'll say 30-27 that the Buffs win this one. I think it'll be a good football game.
So good game, an entertaining game on a Friday night. I think your point about Sonny Dykes is really interesting. Is that first year? I would counterpunch on that just a little bit, in that he's never walked into a program that had as much talent on the roster in year one. So that's going to be and that'll be what's really interesting is this talent has been around, but it hasn't been successful. There's not much to show for it. So can Dykes break the first year curse and get something done? So I think this is a huge tipping point game for both programs. This is probably the difference in a bowl game for both programs. Whoever gets this win is set up much better the rest of the regular season. So I think it's going to be a close game as well. And I think that home field environment on Friday night could be a difference maker. So it'll be a lot of fun to watch. Before I let you go, lots of TCU fans traveling up for this one with the holiday weekend and with it being a great destination. Any hot spots people need to be aware of in Boulder?
Well, I think the obvious one for most people coming up here is hit Pearl Street. The Pearl Street Mall is always a fun place to go walk around. There's cool shops and street performers and just good people watching. And there's some candy shops, ice cream shops, food places along there. So that's a good. I haven't looked to see what they're doing. Usually, the night before a game, there's like a Pearl Street Stampede where it's kind of a pep rally for fans and everybody, and the team goes down there. So the night before, if you're a TCU fan, may not be the night to go down there because you might be bombarded by all the CU fans. But that's a great area up there, and anytime you can go hiking in the Boulder area is fantastic as well. And then if you like Italian food and you like garlic, go to Pasta J's.
Okay, good to know. Now we can't hit Red Rocks Saturday night. Well, there are a certain subset of TCU fans that'll hit Red Rocks, but it's 9 Inch Nails is who we were very disappointed. Nothing against 9 Inch Nails, not really my music scene, but we were all kind of hoping for something maybe a little more middle-aged for that. But
a little tamer.
Yeah, a little tamer. Maybe not the TCU crowd at a 9 Inch Nails concert. So Brian, I super appreciate your time. This was super informative. I think that it's going to be a great environment, great atmosphere. There's going to be an incredible crowd, hopefully for both sides, and a really entertaining football game between two teams that have a lot of questions and are looking to set themselves up for a successful season. So thank you for joining us on Frogs Today, giving us all this great insider information, and look forward to a lot of fun Friday nights. Football is finally back.
I'm excited. We'll see you on Friday night.